I think many of you know I love to listen to music, and when I'm downstairs in the basement in my office, I've got some speakers, and so I'm listening down there, probably louder than most people would. But when I'm up in the living room and other people don't share my desire to listen to it, I have some headphones. And same thing, I've got them on at a level that I can't hear someone just, call my name to get my attention. And so I tell them, if you want to get my attention, just stand in front of me and flap your arms like a chicken, and I'll know you want my attention. But they never do that. Somehow they find another way to get my attention. Well, think about it for a second. What gets God's attention? Now, it's a little different because, God's all-knowing and all-present, but I want you to tell me, what are some things that you think gets God's attention? We can flap our arms. I suppose he'd notice that. What?
Tap on his shoulder.
Tap on his shoulder, and that would get his attention. What? Our worship will get God's attention. Prayer get God's attention. Reading the Bible. Things that we think, and it's interesting what comes to mind that gets God's attention. Well, one indicator for Jesus of times that something got his attention, how do we know that something would even get your attention? That, what would that mean for God? Well, for Jesus, one time or times that we can tell something got his attention is he changed his plans. He was going to do something, he was about to do something, and something got his attention. And he changes. And what often happens is because he makes it clear that his priority is to preach, but often he heals people. And it's not that, that he doesn't care about them, but his focus is to preach, to teach, that spiritual focus. But at times, even though he knows it's going to create crowds and make it difficult for him, he still heals someone. And then a couple weeks ago we saw Jesus had the plan. The disciples had returned from preaching. He says, we need to go to a desolate place so you can rest. And he gets there and he sees the people and he begins to teach them. And in both cases, when he heals or when he teaches, in this case, it's out of compassion. It specifically says there he has compassion on them because they're like sheep without a shepherd. And so that's what gets Jesus' attention, is the need that these people have. He has compassion on it, and he meets that need. It gets his attention. It changes his plans. Well, today, we're going to see a woman is going to do something that's clearly going to get Jesus' attention because he's going to change his plan in a way. And so that should make us wonder, first of all, okay, what'd she do? Why did it get Jesus' attention? And then, all right, how does this apply to me? What is it that I can do to get Jesus' attention? What will it mean for him and God the Father acting in my life? And then also, maybe you weren't thinking this yet, but one thing we need to address, how does it fit in with this theme we've been seeing the last few weeks on a hard heart? Because we're still in this same section. We're going to see how everything is connected. And so today what we're going to see is a sure test for not having a hard heart. And we're going to see that what this thing is gets God's attention, for sure. And he acts because of it. So we're in Mark chapter 7. You can turn there, and I'll be reading from the English Standard Version, starting at verse 24. It says in Mark 7:24, from there he arose, Jesus, and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. But she answered him, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And he said to her, for this statement you may go on your way, the demon has left your daughter. And she went home and found the child laying in bed and the demon gone. Well, you look here, and remember I said this is connected to what we've seen, and you can see Mark's way of indicating that many times is, I guess what you'd say with these geographic clues, that he goes from one place to the other, and Mark makes a point of that. So verse 24 says, and from there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. So it's connected not only to what we just saw last week, but as you keep going back, you'll see that same type of thing. He went from there, and so it goes back to the feeding of the 5,000. Which comes after the disciples have returned from their mission, going out 2 by 2. And the idea of Jesus miraculously providing the food there. It also then takes place on the storm where Jesus walks across the water. And then what we saw last week, where the Pharisees are questioning, why don't you follow the tradition of the elders? And Jesus talks about what makes a person clean or unclean. And one idea we've been seeing in the midst of all this is a hard heart. Jesus specifically says it about the disciples, that when they're there on the sea in the storm, he says they didn't learn the lesson that they should have learned from the loaves because their heart was hardened. He talks about the hearts of the Pharisees being closed, and he talks about what comes out of a heart and what that indicates. And so we've had this idea of a hard heart, and so what's the connection here? It's clearly connected. Mark does that by this geographic reference. From there, he came over here. All right, how does this story with this woman connect to this idea of having a hard heart? And the thing to check is, we just have to see, well, what's this passage about? We just went over a psalm in Sunday school, and you dig a little deeper and you see, all right, what's it about? Well, same thing. Let's look at these verses again. And I want you to think about what is the subject here in this passage. It says, from there, Jesus arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know. He wanted to get away for a while, yet he could not be hidden. So here he is. He's up in a Gentile region. He had been in Galilee, and if you remember, the maps, you have Israel's divided up into Galilee in the north, and then Judea in the south, and in the middle Samaria. Well, Jesus had gone up even further north into the Gentile region. More of a chance for him not to be known there, but still, he could not be hidden. The people knew about him even there. And his ability to perform miracles, because it says immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, so not a Jew, a Syrophoenician specifically by birth. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. So she's heard that Jesus has these miraculous powers, that he can cast a demon out, and her daughter has a demon. And what mother wouldn't want her daughter to be relieved from that? And so she goes to Jesus and she begs him. She believes he can heal him, and so she acts on that belief. He said to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. So did Jesus just call this woman a dog? No, that's an expression. Just like don't cast your pearls before swine. He's not calling people pigs, but it's an expression to make a point. And that would be the point. Hopefully, at my house, even, I guess I've seen some houses where the dogs might get fed first, but, we have a lot of dogs. It seems like there's more all the time. But, we take priority over the dogs. And Jesus is saying here that for my ministry, and again, what we saw in Sunday school, it's certainly God's intention for the gospel eventually to go out to everyone, to the ends of the earth. But Jesus only had a limited time, about 3 years. And he knew to provide the foundation for the church, he had to focus not just on Israel, but then he even narrows it down to the 12. He needs to work with them so that they can be, as the Bible says, the foundation of the church. And so it's not that he doesn't care about the Gentiles, but the time is not right for the focus to go there. He wouldn't be able to build that strong foundation. That's what he's saying. And even by indicating, let the children be fed first, it will eventually happen for the Gentiles, just not now. And he's using this image of sitting at a table and the dogs. He's not calling the woman a dog. But she answered him, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. So she takes that metaphor he's using, and she makes a point with it. And then he said to her, for this statement, you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter. All right, so what is this passage about? And you could say, well, healing and Jesus' power and such. I think when you look at it, and specifically, you look at this woman, She believed that Jesus could heal her daughter. She'd heard it, she believed it, and so she acted on it. And what do we call it when you act on what you believe? Faith. Exactly. This passage is about faith. This woman had faith. She acted on what she believed. She persevered. She persisted. She surrendered. She came there and fell at his feet and begged him. Certainly didn't demand. She knew she relied on him. All the things that encompass faith, this woman has it. Now, it's interesting. In Matthew, Jesus even says, because of your faith, your daughter is healed. Why didn't Mark include that? I don't know. Maybe he thought, well, all right, dig a little deeper. You'll see it, guys. If you just spend some time, some effort, you'll see this is talking about faith here. You know, faith is acting in accordance with what we believe. So how's that fit with this idea we've been talking about with a hard heart? A hard heart is a heart that's closed to the evidence. And so they both deal with this idea of seeing of the evidence. Faith says, all right, I've come to believe the evidence. In her case, I've come to believe that Jesus can heal my daughter, so I'm going to do what makes sense. I'm going to ask him to heal my daughter. But you notice we saw in Nazareth, those people had hard hearts. They knew Jesus could do miracles. They knew he was wise. Yet, what'd they do? They closed their heart to that. Oh, because he's one of us. He grew up here. We know him. And so it says he's unable to do anything great because they're not willing to accept the evidence. Their heart's closed. And so these are basically opposites. You know, if you have faith, you don't have a hard heart. And so as we look at this, you remember a hard heart. We've seen so far that anyone can have it. It's not just those, wicked Gentiles. It's not just those hypocritical Pharisees. Who are the people that we've seen that have a hard heart? The disciples. It's interesting. In the Gospel of Mark, the phrase hard heart or some form of that occurs 5 times. Once it's used of the Israelites in the wilderness in the past. Once it's used of the Pharisees. 3 times it's used of the disciples. So it's not just these wicked people. Anyone, people who are trying to follow God, can have a hard heart. Anyone can have it, and it is extremely serious. We saw last week, it can lead me to do things that look godly but really oppose him, and I don't even know it. It can lead me to outright sins. Jesus lists off these sins and not even realize it. And that's the other thing that makes it so serious, is so often it's undiagnosed. I don't know. I can't just say, yes, I have a hard heart. No, I don't. And I know that that's a correct answer. Because the people with hard hearts praise God with their lips. They worship him. Well, that's what we're doing, right? So how do I know I don't have a hard heart? I need to check. And so far, we've looked at some of the indicators of having it. And one we saw last week is if you not only have your opinion about something, but you make these man-made rules and try to impose them on others and judge others according to the things that God hasn't specifically commanded. We said that's one mark of a hard heart. It not only comes from a hard heart, it leads to it. It's a cycle. We've seen also, as we go back a little further, if I want something more than I want God, I want something. I want to serve God as a Christian. I say that, but then I keep doing this other thing. Well, I must want something more if I keep doing it. And so that's an indicator of having a hard heart. Well, today we're looking at not just an indicator, but proof that I don't have a hard heart, at least in a certain area, and that's faith. Because by its very nature, oftentimes when we think of faith, we think of confidence, right? I have faith that something's going to happen, and it's almost like I have confidence. Well, that's a part of faith, but it's not really at the heart of faith. Faith at its heart is a surrender to God. It's why I talk about, instead of faith that something's going to happen, oftentimes that I've decided, I need to have faith in God. That whatever he wants is going to be ultimately the best, because he's in control and he loves me. And I surrender to that. I rely upon that. Faith is far more surrender and reliance than it is confidence. There's a confidence, but my confidence is God's going to do what's best, not any specific thing. I always use the illustration for faith of Indiana Jones. And, the third movie where he's seen those first 2 clues, and the book that he has is proven to be reliable. And so he gets to that third one about stepping out there on faith. And he takes that step. He can't see the bridge that's there, but he takes that step. And there's an element of confidence that, well, the book's been right so far. But think about it. There's a huge element of surrender, isn't there? I'm surrendering to whatever happens. If there's nothing here, I'm going to fall, and I'm surrendered to that. There's an element of reliance. The book's been right so far. I'm going to rely on what it says. So it all works together, and our faith is the same way. Well, if I'm surrendered, if I'm reliant, that's the very opposite of a hard heart, which says I won't surrender to the evidence. Yeah, it makes total sense that I should believe in God. And some people don't because they just refuse to. It makes total sense that when I hear something new, I should examine my life and live differently. But I'm not going to. My heart is closed. Well, faith means, no, my heart isn't closed. I'm surrendered. I'm reliant. God, whatever you say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to examine and see how my life fits with what your word says. And so if I have faith, if I'm walking by faith, that's an indicator my heart is soft. And so this is a great test right here as we talk about this. You know, underlying all of those things, you talk about surrender, you talk about reliance, is humility. This humility, God is God and I'm not. Whatever He says, I'm surrendered to. God is God and I'm not. I have to rely on Him because I know He can do far more than I can. And a hard heart is the very opposite of humility. It's this pride that says, I refuse to listen. I refuse to change. I refuse to even examine myself and see if I need to listen and change. So everything about it's the opposite. So faith is an indicator. It's proof. My heart is not hard in this area. So it's connected to what we've seen. This passage here, it just keeps going from hard heart, and now it's sort of this bridge from a hard heart to faith. And so there's some lessons about faith here. And the first lesson about faith is faith by its nature includes challenges. Again, faith is acting in accordance with what I believe. I believe there's a God. I believe He loves me. I believe He says to do a certain thing. And so I act in a way that's consistent with that. Well, it becomes a challenge when it's difficult to act, right? You know, maybe showing up here on on Sunday isn't much of a challenge, but maybe if you had something else you'd really like to do, it's a little bit of a challenge. You know, maybe if there's some cost to standing up for God, it's a challenge. You know, to stay up in here, do you believe in God? We raise our hand, not a big deal, right? You know, if you were in the middle of some Muslim country surrounded by radical, extreme Muslims, do you believe in God? That's a little bit of a challenge. Well, faith always has those challenges. That's part of the nature of faith. Will I live according to what I believe when there's a challenge, when it's difficult? Faith is like that. And for the woman, you see this. Look again, verse 26. It says, now the woman was a Gentile. Right there is two challenges. She was a woman. You remember what the disciples, it says when Jesus was talking to the woman at the well? That was just for that culture, for a man to be talking to a woman he didn't know. And so for her to approach Jesus, there was a little bit of a stigma. And it says she's a Gentile. She knows he's a Jew. She knows he can heal. We don't know what else she knows about his character. A lot of Jews hated the Gentiles. And so for her to say, I'm going to go and approach this Jew, and who knows how she felt about Jews in general. A lot of times when one group hates another group, well, how's that group feel about the first group? They hate them too. I've got to humble myself before a Jew. But I believe he can heal my daughter. And so that's elements of faith. Will I surrender? Will I rely upon him? And then I thought it was interesting. The New American Standard for this verse says, and she begged, the ESV says she begged him. The NASB says she kept asking to cast the demon out of her. The ESV says in verse 27, and Jesus said, the NASB says he was saying to her, let the children be fed first. So what that indicates is it seems like it wasn't just one time. That she kept begging and he kept saying this, and it maybe went back and forth a little bit, but she persevered. That's a mark of faith. And that's a challenge. It wasn't just she said it, Jesus did it, all right. It's that it was strung out for a little bit. It didn't happen right away. Isn't that often a challenge when it comes for faith? It doesn't happen when I want it to. It doesn't happen as soon as I'd like it to. So this woman faced a challenge. She showed true faith. Well, the same thing for us. Faith is always going to include a challenge. I'd say that faith is the foundation for obedience. As important as obedience is, faith is even more important because anytime it's difficult to obey, what is it that gets me to obey? God says to do this. It's going to be difficult if I do this. What is it that moves me to do it? Well, very often it's this idea of I trust that God's will is best. I trust He knows what's best. Even though it may be difficult, it may not be easiest, I trust it's best. That's faith that underlies that obedience. Again, it's one thing to sit here and say, I believe. It'd be another one to say, wow, is it really best to say, yes, I believe, in the middle of people who could put me to death? Is it really best to be honest in a work situation when it could get me into trouble? In a home situation when, boy, I'd rather not tell mom and dad. Boy, I'd rather not this come, to be honest. We trust God that it is, and we act accordingly. As a trust for God's provision, I'm in a situation, and through my own power, my own resources, my own finances, I don't see how I'm going to make it. That's a challenge. That's when faith comes into play. I don't see. Walk by faith, not by sight. How it's going to happen, but I trust God. Now, once again, I don't know exactly what God's going to do or how He's going to do it. I remember there was a time when we had, I guess we had 2 cars because Lisa's one job had a company car. Well, she switched jobs and no longer had a company car. And so we were down to 1 and weren't ready to buy another one. And it was fine for a while, and then I started needing to get someplace. Fortunately, in Scottsdale, where we live, they have an awesome trolley system. And I needed to get from where we lived to church, and there was a stop right outside our apartment and right at church. Now, it still wasn't my favorite thing, though. I'd rather have had a car. And so I trusted in God's provision. And at first in my mind was, I trust God will provide a car. And then it struck me, maybe God has already provided. You've got a trolley that goes right from your condo to the church. And you know what? Maybe what God wants to provide is a chance to meet someone on that trolley and impact them for God. I trust God will provide, but I can't dictate what it's going to look like. But I need to trust Him. There's a situation. I don't see how my resources will provide for it. I trust God. And one point to remember is, as part of that, we need to expect these challenges. Faith by its very nature includes challenges, and we can say that and shake our heads, but we really got to be expecting it, because when something happens you don't expect, it makes it even more difficult to deal with. James tells us, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. Notice he doesn't say if. He doesn't say perchance. If it should happen to you. No, he says when. You will face trials of various kinds. Be ready for that. It helps. Now, I realized that this past week, but what I didn't realize, sometimes I expect these trials, but I sort of limit in my mind, okay, well, here's what that could be. And so this past week, I've really worked on my attitude. And I struggle not getting frustrated when things don't go the way I expect. And so, and one thing that always overwhelms me in anything is if you try to say, I'll never get mad again. How about I'll just have a good attitude today? And so I did that early in the week. And I had a good day. I think it was like maybe Tuesday, and did pretty well. And Wednesday, I did pretty well. And so Thursday, I'm feeling pretty confident. Matter of fact, I even added to it. I thought, you know what? I'm not just going to wake up and say I'm going to have a good attitude today. I want to think about the things that could derail me. Because again, it's better to be prepared, right? And so I went through the list of, I wanted to make videos that day. And, if things don't happen, there's some noise, upstairs that can, get me upset, so I'll be ready for that. The dogs are always a big thing at our house. Again, we've got 4. We're watching another one. We had a 6th last night, that's gone today. But, and that's always something. Yesterday a dog ate some of the coasters. And there's always going to be something. So I'm thinking, the dogs. I got to be prepared for the dogs. Well, apparently I wasn't prepared enough, because in whatever I had in my mind, about noon, Lisa had gone somewhere for a while, and I was downstairs. We get home, and Lisa's like, why are your glasses in the middle of the living room? And we've got a little dog that has determined, she used to always get up on the kitchen table, and we can't stop it because the one chairs have arms, and so you can't push them in all the way. And she used to just eat what was on there. Now she pushes something off so her and another dog can chew on it. So here's my glasses, these that are important to me because they work well. They're not so strong that I can't keep them on and preach. They were chewed up. I hadn't expected that. I got upset. There was not a good attitude day because I wasn't expecting. And maybe that's the problem. Anything I expect, I just need to whatever, God. It's good to maybe know what could happen, but boy, I got to be ready for whatever happens. Faith will always include challenges. God, your way is best. You allowed this to happen. You guided me to this situation in the sense of, here I am, I need glasses. My wife likes dogs. One of our dogs likes to get on the kitchen table. I left my glasses on the kitchen table. Who would have thought they'd want to chew glasses? You've guided me here. You'll provide. And sometimes that provision is just, hey, Steve, get over it. And by the way, I went to I can't even believe how well he fixed these. Like, you can't even tell. I never would have thought. God there showing you, hey, I'll provide. But we need to be ready for that. We need to know, if I commit to living this life of faith, I'm saying I commit to facing these challenges. And here's the thing, you're going to face the challenges anyway. You might as well face them with faith. As James says, for you know the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. If you know that, and if you act accordingly, it will produce steadfastness. If not, you'll just get upset and you'll be as unsteadfast as you were before. Well, the next thing that helps us as we think about this and we see in this passage is that faith that we're talking about that's going to include challenges. God will notice and reward our faith. I always wonder in these situations, because Jesus, when he came to earth, gave up his omniscience, certainly his omnipresence. He didn't have all that. What did Jesus know in these situations? You know, did he know when that woman first came there, okay, here's what's going to happen. I'll say this, she'll say this, we'll go back and forth. I don't know. But certainly the Holy Spirit would guide him, and Jesus followed that guidance. And so you see Jesus given this opportunity to the woman to have faith. He says in verse 27, let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. And so right there he's leaving the door open. And just this metaphor that he uses that we can all understand, okay, the kids should get fed before the dogs. And then the woman, what she says, but yeah, even the dogs get the crumbs that fall from the table. And everything else she had done to show faith. And Jesus sees that, and he's moved by that. You know, I asked earlier what gets God's attention, and the indicator for Jesus was, you know, he changes his plans. Whatever it is. Here he sees a woman with faith. Other times he sees a need. He changes his plans. Well, for God, another way to ask this, an indicator for God, is what pleases God? What would you say to that? What pleases God? What pleases God?
Obedience.
Obedience. Thank you. That's the answer I wanted. You know why I wanted it? Because it's not the best answer. But it is the common answer. That is so our focus, isn't it? What pleases God? Obedience. You know what it says in the Bible? Look at Hebrews 11:6. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Now, does God want us to obey? Yes, but remember what we say. What underlies obedience that takes any effort at all? Faith. Again, to obey him when things are easy, okay, but to obey him when things are difficult, I've got to trust God, you know best, even though it doesn't look like it. If I obey you, God, I see what negative thing is going to happen. From getting in trouble with mom and dad, to getting in trouble at work, to having less money if I don't fudge some things here, to having my head cut off if I'm a person in a country ruled by Muslim extremists. God, I trust your way is best. And it's that faith that pleases God. Because that's what's different. A lot of people do the things God says to do. There's a lot of people who don't lie and don't steal and all of that, but they don't have faith. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. And we have come to focus so much on obedience. That's just the base level. That's just, well, of course, you need to obey. You need to have faith. You need to walk by this faith all the time. Hebrews 11:6 goes on to say, without faith it is impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. God will notice our faith. Why? Because it pleases him. And he'll reward our faith. And that's going to encourage us, right? I've just said, if we want to have a soft heart, we need to have faith. Well, if we have faith, we're going to face challenges. Gee, Steve, thanks for that. But this verse then tells us, if I have that faith, if I face those challenges with faith, God's going to notice. That's what pleases God, and he is going to reward us. I didn't give the main idea at first today. I thought I'll wait and see. It seems like it fits well here. And you'll see on your handout, the main idea is faith that flows from and indicates a soft heart will be rewarded by God. I can know that. I can trust that. Take that away if nothing else today. Faith that flows from and indicates a soft heart will be rewarded by God. Now, in our day and age, I've got to make it clear. That faith that I'm talking about is a response to God, not a request from me. That doesn't mean I can say, God, I would like this, and so I'm going to trust that you will give me this thing that I've just requested. That makes us God and God a bellhop. Faith in God versus faith that. I am responding to where God has led me. I'm in this situation, whether He's caused it, allowed it, whatever. Here I am. My glasses are on the floor and chewed up. God, you'll provide. And not even necessarily a new, good as new pair of glasses. It might be glasses that are still all whatever. God's going to provide. If nothing else, He'll provide the strength for me not to get upset. That was part of my problem. I got proud of myself. Oh, look at that. I did 2 days pretty well. I need to commit to having a good attitude, but I need to commit even more to trusting in God's power versus mine. And then, as I said, and this comes up all the time, I've got to trust God's choice of what He's going to do, how He's going to do it, and when He's going to do it. Isn't it so easy for us to, God, I trust you. All right, God, I trusted you. What's up? What's taking so long? I trusted you, and this is what I get, God? Come on, I was trusting you. Oh yeah, I was trusting that you would do this specific thing instead of just trusting in. Isn't it so easy to fall into that? Especially when what we trust God for makes so much sense. I mean, I'm pretty good. God, what would be wrong with this? What could be better than this? I know some of you, I've talked to you, things with our kids. God, I trusted you, and this is what happened? I trusted you, and my daughter's at a place for 5 months as of today. Really? That's what trust gets you? Yeah, sometimes. Because I trust in God that His way is best. And you know what? I'm starting to see how this is best and everything it's doing. And that's always the case. I don't know specific. If it was me, if God said, hey, Steve, how do you want things to work out? What a mess this world would be in. If He was just asking each one of us, tell me what you want, I'll do it. And you're a little bit like Bruce Almighty. You remember what happened? You ever see that movie? He's put in charge. He's made God for a specific amount of time. He gets tired of answering prayer requests, so he just answers them all yes. All yes. The things just go crazy. Everyone wins the lottery, but they all get like 5 cents, Everyone gets all these things. No, God shouldn't say yes to all our prayer requests. The world would be an utter mess. And so I've got to trust Him. The problem is, I don't want God to say yes to everyone's prayer requests, just mine. No. I've got to trust God. His what, His how, His when. I've got to trust in God. God is certainly waiting for us to act in faith, to act out of faith, and He's waiting to respond. Matter of fact, He wants to respond. He's up there saying, please, walk by faith, not by sight. Not just because you should, not just because I've said so. It is best. Trust me. And it's our choice whether to do it or not. Let that sink in. The God who created the world, who sustained the world, who sent His Son, is up in heaven saying, please, you just trust me. You'll love it when you walk by faith. It won't be the easiest, but it will be the best. True faith, true surrender, true reliance. Well, what is the root problem here? What keeps us from acting this way, from doing everything we're seeing here? And I think the reason would be, and it comes up a little bit what I said, is we've devalued faith. Now, we would never say that. How valuable is faith? Well, very, of course, we're Christians. But in practice, I definitely think we put it below obedience. We've been conditioned by that. What's the most important thing? Well, to obey. It's not the most important because it rests on trust. It rests on faith. There's plenty of people obeying God's laws just because, for whatever personal reason, they don't have faith. They're not trusting God to provide. I've got to have this faith. And it has to be, you know what? It's not even on a list. It's not even a matter, okay, what are the most important things? Well, faith is first and obedience is second and da-da-da-da-da. Faith is not just one item on a list. Faith is part of our DNA. There is nothing that we should do as a Christian that faith isn't playing a part in it, doesn't have a hand in. And it's a part of our DNA. It's not even just a faith is a finger and that's the most important, or a hand, a fist, versus a foot. No, faith is our DNA. It's in everything of us. And we've got to view it that way. And I've got to live my life that way. And so that's the key to overcoming. I've got to see it. It's what makes me a Christian, is faith, not obedience. Faith is what makes me a Christian. Obedience should be what results. And what do I need to do now? A soft heart is clearly better. I think we'd all agree. Why don't we always have one? Why don't we have one in every area? Why is our heart sometimes hard? Why are we sometimes closed to the evidence? We need to examine. I put there 2 things for us to follow up on, to take from today and move forward with. First of all, examine myself for a hard heart based on this test. Do I truly walk by faith? Is my life characterized by faith? Because to the degree it is, then I know I don't have a hard heart. And then the other one, examine my perspective on faith. How DNA-like is it? Not even just is faith at the top of the list, is faith the list? Is everything, is it like the background, the watermark on the list? Is it my DNA? Whatever illustration works for you to realize it's not just one part and the most important part, it's everything. My life is to be governed by faith. This reliance on God, this surrender to God, this humility before God. And then ask yourself, what's one specific thing I can do to better live out faith? Think of something, whatever it is for you. What's one thing I can do to move forward, to better live out my life through faith? And as we come to our time of decision and invitation, well, all right, you get to decide. Am I going to take these steps and do anything with them, or shake my head and move on? And if I've never made that first decision to accept Christ, am I going to start there? If I've maybe been, agreeable to God, but I've never specifically committed, I haven't, I believe, I repent, and I'm baptized. If I haven't done that, now's the time to do it. Wherever you are in that, let's stand and we're going to sing this hymn of decision. It's a chance for all of us to make that decision.